Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a sunny, beautiful day here in Tucson. Thank you for joining us today. We have really been enjoying seeing all of you and getting to talk about our work twice a month, which is the schedule for our coffee break series. I want to start by saying thank you to all of the Sky Island Alliance supporters, volunteers, partners that have helped us work on protecting this amazing region over many, many years. I want to especially thank our Spring Seeker volunteers. In 2020, it was the year we measured and surveyed the most number of springs in our history. 256 springs were surveyed last year, and 89 of those were in Sonora, Mexico, which is really exciting. We'd like to acknowledge that all of our conservation science work and restoration work that we've done as an organization has happened on native lands. Skyland Alliance, its office is located in Tucson, and this is the ancestral land of Tohono O'odham and Pasquayaqui peoples. If you have any questions today as you're listening to the talk, please go ahead and type them into the chat box. We're going to be looking at those as this come through, and we'll save some time at the end of the presentation to do some question and answers. And with that, I'm really excited today that we have two absolute experts about our region that are going to share insight into the high elevation springs at Saguaro National Park. We'll be hearing from Don Swann, who is a biologist and one of my personal heroes, who's taught me so much about this region and the wildlife here, and has made me so excited to hike up and find high elevation springs. So welcome, Don. We'll also be hearing from Dan Beckman, and he is the field technician who is also a botanical expert. And so I love botany quite a bit, and I can't wait to learn from him today. So welcome, everyone. Once again, we still have some people coming in to join us this morning, but I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton off to.
So obviously this is a little out of order, but Don will be giving some more general background, but basically we've been doing a lot of work, especially the past 4 years, of monitoring the high elevations of the Rincon Mountains, which are the Sky Island mountain range that's in the East District of Saguaro National Park, and one of the most remote sky islands in the region because it's all wilderness and there's no roads going all the way up. So there's a lot of secrets still and mysteries and places to explore. So I'm going to be talking about some unmapped springs that we've found in the course of rare plant surveys over the past 4 years, and talking about the connections between spring habitats and rare plant populations. So the spring here on the slide is, we call this Rose Spring because there's a population of wild rose. This is on the north slope of Mica Mountain in the Rincons. You can see the willows and dewberry and all that bright green indicating the spring habitat. So, okay, so these plant surveys were motivated initially by a search for lost plants of the Rincon Mountains. So these are species that we were worried might be extirpated or locally extinct from the range. So a brief timeline here. In 1987, Jan Bowers and Steve McLaughlin published a flora of the Rincon Mountains. And a flora is basically a publication that's trying to document all the plant species occurring in a given area. And so this was an amazing publication. They documented close to 1,000 plant species in the Rincon Mountains. But they also listed 41 species that had historical records in the Rincons that they were not able to encounter in their field work. And they particularly highlighted a group of them that were high elevation, moisture loving species that they worried may have been lost due to drought or other habitat changes. So Don was concerned about this and curious about this and assembled a team to basically research this list more closely over the course of about 4 years and determine a list of species that we should be looking for in the park that might be extirpated, but we need more information on. So I came on in 2017 and for the past 4 years have been looking for those species in the high elevations. And the project's been more successful than I ever could have imagined. We've rediscovered most of those plant species that we've been looking for, and also found species that were never recorded scientifically in the Rincon Mountains, as well as unmapped springs that we encountered. So lots of cool findings, which I'm gonna go into. So this is a map kind of summarizing our survey effort from the past 4 years. So this is Mica Mountain. The summit is like here. We based our work out of Manning Camp, a historic cabin right here. And this hatched area in the middle is areas where we did systematic mapping, so walking transects and really covering all this terrain closely. Don's going to talk more about that. The green lines are drainage surveys that are focused on looking for rare plants that I led. And you can see we started really getting pretty far out there, pretty far off trail, and did some backpacking and did some long hikes all the way down the mountain at the end of work weeks. So it's really fun to explore. And these light blue dots are new springs we found, or at least new to the park's knowledge, that did not appear on maps. So you can see that there are a lot of new springs that we didn't know about before, and certain hot spots and areas where they seem to appear a lot. So now I'm going to highlight 4 of those springs that are amazing places that have really clear rare plant connections. So this is one that we encountered on the north slope that we called Scarlet Spring because of this amazing carpet of scarlet monkey flower. This is on the north slope of Mica Mountain. And this is a major rare plant hotspot in the Rincons. So this scarlet monkey flower this is the only place, well, the spring and then downstream of it is the only area so far where we've seen this species in the Rincons. And this has been traditionally known by the scientific name Mimulus cardinalis. New research actually from 2014 indicates that this is likely a related but separate endemic species to the Southeast Arizona Sky Islands, which is also known in the Catalinas, the Pinaleños, and the Chiricahuas. So that made it even more exciting. Here's another photo. Yeah, when these flowers are all going off, it's really a stunning habitat there. It totally dominates this spring area. And there's some other species that are super rare in the Rincons that are known at the spring. We have gray leaf red raspberry, which is like your classic American wild raspberry. Fringed willow herb, which is this kind of wetland evening primrose herb. And then red baneberry, which has those striking red and not surprisingly very poisonous berries. The next spring I want to highlight is Art Spring. So this is kind of a long story, which I'll try to be brief about. This was a spring that is on historical maps, but we had looked for it in the past at the mapped location and had not seen anything that seemed particularly spring-like, and were very curious about what was going on with this spring. It turns out that it had been pretty badly misplaced on maps. So through these rare plant surveys, we came across this amazing spring that initially I thought was something completely new to the park's knowledge, but eventually we put a bunch of evidence together and realized that this was actually Art Spring that had just kind of fallen off the park's radar. So on the left is a photo of it from 2018. On the right is a photo with the art that the spring was named after. Art Jansen was a firefighter in the Rincons in the 1960s, and he modified that bottom pool to make the water more accessible to firefighters. So kind of amazing that something in the recent past had gone lost. But we were particularly excited because this is the spring where we rediscovered this orchid species, Thurber's bog orchid. So this was a species that we really did think was probably extirpated because it had been collected in the Rincons in 1891 and not recorded again until we found it at Art Spring in 2018. So we had spent all this time looking at all the spring habitats that we already knew about and had not found it. So we really thought this was gone. So this was really exciting to find. This is the spike of kind of yellow-green flowers. And in the Rincons still, we only know of it currently at Art Spring and then another spot just a little bit downstream from there. This is an orchid that's widely distributed in Mexico, but it's very rare in the US. It's also known in the Catalinas and the Huachucas and the Chiricahuas. The next spring is much further down the mountain. This is more of a mid-elevation spring, just above 5,000 feet on the east slope. This is Turkey Creek Spring or Blackberry Spring. That's named after all of this dewberry, this dense, very thorny, painful ground cover. Dewberry is a lot like blackberries, hence the name. This is another place with an amazing, unique, rare plant, which is giant chain fern. It truly lives up to its name, and this is the largest native fern in North America. And it's abundant around Turkey Creek Spring, but it's not currently known anywhere else in the Rincons. And as you can see on this distribution map, this is really like a Pacific coast, or Pacific ranges species that ranges from Baja California all the way up to British Columbia. But it has this disjunct distribution in some really special kind of wet shaded canyon habitats in Arizona. So this is a really cool, clearly spring dependent, amazing fern species. Here's another photo of the spring area, and you can see those huge ferns basically following the trickle of the spring down from that slope. The final spring I'm going to highlight is one that we kind of figured out through the systematic mapping around Mica Mountain and revisiting water points that we took, looking for spots of perennial water. So this is a section of Upper Chimenea Creek, and we determined that there's a bedrock seep here on the right, which is perennial, and you see a photo of collecting a water sample. Don's going to talk about water chemistry and what we've learned about some of these spring waters. But that seep feeds a series of perennial pools downstream and very rich soil. So it creates this really magical plant habitat. And there's 4 species in this area that are currently not known anywhere else in the Rincons. So I'm going to highlight those briefly. This is thin leaf alder, which is a different species than Arizona alder, which is the much more common riparian tree that we find in this area. This is a real Rocky Mountain species, as you can see with the distribution here, and is in our Southern Arizona region is also known in the Pinaleños. It's just this one population around these spring-fed pools in Upper Chimenea Creek. And this is the southern range limit that's currently known for the species, which is pretty amazing. And the other species that are unique there, red Oziar Dogwood, which is a woody, kind of sprawling, viney shrub with those gorgeous white flower clusters. Virginia strawberry, classic wild strawberry. And I think it's pretty cool that this photo of it in the snow was from late May, freak storm we had in 2019 when we were up there. That was really fun. And then this really small population on a north-facing creek bank of Pipsissewa, or Western Prince's pine, with these gorgeous pink flowers. And this was one of the most shocking and exciting findings to me, because this is very rare in our region. It's known in the Pinaleños. There's some historical records in the Chiricahuas, but there's some thought that major fires may have wiped out populations there. But this is a plant that's kind of all around the Northern Hemisphere in cool temperate zones, but just doesn't find the habitat very often in this region. So it's kind of amazing that it's hanging on in this one spot. So major themes from all this exploration is that there's a lot more springs out there than we think, maybe especially in the Rincons, but I would wager to say in all of our Scott Island ranges, just because they're so rugged and so vast. Finding springs is you kind of just need to keep looking. There's no perfect formula for finding them, although I think the more time you spend in a range, you can start to see trends and hotspot areas that we started following up on, I think, more intentionally last year, and we're able to find more and more springs. And clearly some of these rare plant species are truly relying on spring habitats. And if certain springs in the Rincons dry up, then these extirpations that we're concerned about are likely. So it's really important to continue monitoring these places. I'm going to very quickly, because I want to give on time. Here's just some more nice photos of other springs that we've encountered that were unmapped. And I'm trying to show in these photos just how the bright green plant populations really kind of give away that it is a spring habitat. So like I was mentioning earlier, because these habitats are so important to biodiversity and so important for a variety of reasons, we want to also do a good job of monitoring these spring habitats and collaborating with amazing local organizations that are already doing similar work. So this includes the Spring Stewardship Institute, which is based up in Flagstaff, Sky Island Alliance, of course, and we're really excited about this Spring Seeker program. And then our NPS, our Park Service partners at this Sonoran Desert Network, which they do a lot of the inventory and monitoring science work for the parks, and have been doing springs monitoring of their own at the historic springs in the Rincons. So we've been experimenting with monitoring protocols and started with something that was a little more hard to collect and more, I guess, hard science based on the Spring Stewardship Institute protocol. Found this to be a little too challenging, especially with these springs being so remote and time being limited. So last year we kind of made an effort to simplify this protocol, and we're still going to continue experimenting with that, and we're thinking about how to share data with our regional partners and simplify that process. And actually this coming summer, we're going to have 2 interns up there working with us that are going to be completely focused on springs monitoring. So we expect to do a lot more focused work on this in this year. So now I'm going to try to hand it over to Don if he is technologically equipped right now.
Thank you, Dan, for that wonderful introduction to my introduction. I just want to, just acknowledge our co-authors, Olivia Thorpe and Nicole Gonzalez, who aren't speaking today, but put a lot of work into this. And this, of course, the Rincon Mountains are the ancestral lands to many Native American tribes, and want to acknowledge that this view is from the eastern part of Tucson, looking out over Mica Mountain and Tanqueverde Peak on the right. Next. What I'd like to talk about today is just kind of springs in general, and kind of how important they are for our park. And this work really was inspired by the Sky Island Alliance, and as Dan mentioned, the Spring Stewardship Institute, and has been funded primarily by the Friends of Saguaro National Park. This photograph shows a spring workshop that we did with Sky Island and Spring Stewardship Institute and our interns from the park and Mexico last couple of years ago before the pandemic. Nick, go ahead and forward that, Emily, if you can. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
So the roadmap is a little different than we expected, but Dan has talked a little bit about the plants and the springs themselves. I'm going to give kind of an introduction to the Rincons, and then a little background on some of the questions that we in the park have about springs, and why we have those questions, because I think it's kind of fundamental to understanding why we're doing this work. And then next slide, a little bit about how we've gone about generally in learning more about our springs, specifically some of the methods that we've used. And then we'll talk a little bit about, go ahead and advance the slides if you can, Emily. I think I'm still seeing the first roadmap one. And then, why we think this all matters. I think for many in the audience, it goes without saying why this matters, but it's worth saying. Next slide. So the Rincons are one of the northern Sky Islands in this wonderful Sky Island region that we live in. We're kind of a sister mountain range to the Catalinas, just to the north. Go ahead and show the next slide. From a Tucson-centric point of view, for those of us who live in Tucson, the Rincon Mountain District of Saguaro National Park is what you see if you look all the way east on Speedway or Broadway. It's that mountain range, and we're talking today about the high elevation area of the Rincons. There is another district of Saguaro National Park, which is in the Tucson Mountains over by the Desert Museum, and I won't really talk about that today. Next slide. The Rincons can be seen from anywhere in Tucson if you look to the east. This particular view is just looking from the Catalina Highway. Mica Mountain is in the foreground, Rincon Peak is in the background. Both of those, reach up above 8,500 feet. And, this Rincon mountain range is a lot like driving up to the top of Mount Lemmon. The big difference is that it's a roadless wilderness. There's never been a road to the top of the Rincons, and the only way that you can get up there is by hiking or taking a mule or a horse. So it's a very remote area and wonderful to hike into if you haven't had the chance. Next slide. Within this really large and beautiful mountain range, there are many springs. So it's a desert range, and we're known for saguaros and cactus. But even at low elevations, but especially at high elevations, we have a lot of different kinds of springs. And there are hill slope springs and springs that are just kind of in random areas. A lot of what we call Rio Crane springs that are associated with drainages. And these tinajas, or these rock pools, sometimes have water flowing out of them, but not into them on the surface. And so we know that they're spring fed. Go ahead and show the next slide. And again, for most people, springs don't need any introduction, but essentially they're places on the earth where water that's moving underground as groundwater finds an opening on the land surface and emerges. And springs, go ahead and show the next slide, Emily. Springs are important for so many different reasons. They're critical for wildlife in this arid region. On the left, you can see a black bear that's kind of wallowing in one of our springs up at high elevations, and we see this a lot when we set up video cameras. And And then on the right is just some of the typical vegetation that you'll only find at springs, like Virginia creeper and riparian trees like alder that Dan mentioned, and sedges and rushes. So they're just so critical for the biological diversity of this area. Next slide. And of course, they're also really important for us as people, and particularly in the Saguaro National Park and along the Arizona Trail. If you're hiking or camping up in an area that's a roadless wilderness, you need to drink water. And so our springs are the essential water sources for hikers and campers up there, and they need them to survive and make it through the Rincons. So springs have always been a really high importance from a management point of view in the park. This is someone filling up his water bottle at Italian Spring. Next slide. Dan mentioned Janice Emily Bowers, and if you ever read this book, it's a wonderful book, The Mountains Next Door, and it's about her travels in the Rincons and doing the botanical surveys that he referred to. And at one point, she and her husband were desperate for water, and they were really dehydrated, and they came across Deerhead Spring. And I put this quote in here because I love it so much. We saw untrammeled water, cold and clear and pure, flowing from a dry hillside where oaks and pines released a silent rain of leaves and needles. The first thing Steve, her husband, did was fill 2 canteens. He handed one to me, and I drank and drank and drank, water spilling down my throat, down my chin, down my shirt. I cupped my hands at the spring, and the cold water welled up between my fingers, and I splashed it on my face and poured it over my sweaty head and let it trickle down my back. And next slide. She goes on to say, and I'm going to keep reading this because I love it so much. I learned that day a spring is a miracle, a promise, a renewal. How can we despair as long as Deerhead Spring flows quietly from pine needles and oak leaves, spills across rushes and sedges, grasses and violets, and rushes headlong and heedless into the forest below? It's the weeping eye that never ceases to weep, the heart that never fails to yield the lifeblood of the mountain. Deerhead Spring promises that we will never lack for water, nor for the things of the spirit, the deeper wisdom that welling up inside nourish us and keep us alive. Go ahead and show the next slide, Emily. It's just a photograph. I mean, I think all of us feel this way when we encounter these mountain springs. They're so refreshing and amazing, and I love them. Next slide. What's really interesting about Jan Bauer's observations, which occurred in the 1980s, is that Deerhead Spring, the spring that she writes about, has been nearly always dry since the late 1990s. I remember when it was gushing back in the early 90s, mid 90s, but it hasn't gushed now for more than 25 years. And so that really brought up the question of what is going on with springs in the Rincon Mountains, and really inspired this work that we're doing. Next slide. And we can scroll through these next few images, Emily. So, Spud Rock Spring, which was a wonderful spring back in the early decades of the 1900s, is dry and the water's terrible. And Art Spring is the one that we thought it had disappeared, but of course Dan discovered it. So he took my punchline on that. And then Jug Spring is one that was, served a whole ranch in the lower elevations and is now dry most of the year. And we see this on a lot of the historic springs, is that they're dry now. And we read records that they were once very reliable. Next slide. So for us, it really brought up this question: Are we losing the water in the Rincon Mountain Springs? Next slide. And if so, why are we losing that water? The obvious answer is that it might be related to climate change. The temperature in the Rincons has been rising steadily in southern Arizona for the last few decades. And so climate change is one of the potential causes for this loss of water. But there are lots of other potential reasons. And before we said that, we really wanted to try to better understand what's going on with these springs. And as I said, this was really inspired by some of the work that Sky Island Alliance and Spring Stewardship Institute were doing elsewhere in southern Arizona. Next slide. So Dan's talked about the other question about losing rare plants, so we can continue on. I won't introduce that again. One of the things that we did is we pulled out all of the old maps that we could find, and I said this, so we can go ahead. We pulled out all the old maps that we could find of the Rincons, and those included old topographic maps, next slide, old grazing maps, old park maps from the 1930s and the 1940s. And so working with our partners at the Sonoran Desert Network, we did an inventory based on these historic records. In this slide, you can see right in the center, there's something called Haria, and it's an old range map from 1928 that shows a spring. This is one that we hadn't heard of, so we went out looking for springs like this that might not have been mentioned since the 20s. And then we did an inventory, we did an assessment, based on the methods that the Spring Stewardship Institute and Park Service had developed. This is Greg Goodrum, one of the biotechs for the Sonoran Desert Network at Bear Wallow Spring. Bear Wallow Spring is a really cool spring. I just have to jump in here to say it. It's up near Rincon Peak, and it's the site where the last grizzly bear in southern Arizona was killed. It was trapped there by a rancher in the early 1920s, probably 1921, and that was the last grizzly bear in this area. Next slide. What was really neat about this inventory, which took place about 5 years ago, is that as Greg and other folks were tromping around in the mountain, they started running into springs that weren't on any maps. So this is an example, Mica Mountain Trail Spring, and they found a number of these springs that were missing from maps. And so that was just really interesting, that there might be springs that were good springs that were not mapped. Next slide. So we started asking ourselves, what if we systematically looked for springs? What if we started hiking around along transects in the Rincons, working our way through the brush and down drainages, and tried to find springs. So we started doing that in 2017. Dan showed a map earlier that showed the areas that we've mapped. And in doing that, we encountered a large number of small and large springs. And we're continuing that work. We've done it now for 3 summers, and we're going to do it again this summer. So this is mainly work done by next-gen ranger interns from the Friends of Saguaro National Park and some of our biotechs. Once we did discover a spring, then what we've been doing is going back and revisiting that spring every month or so during the dry period leading up to the monsoon rains in the summer to see if it still has water. So the idea is to answer the question of which of the springs in the Rincons are the most perennial. And so these water revisits have been really helpful, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next slide. And then finally, we started to, again, you can see Louise in this photograph, working with Sky Island Alliance and others to sort of ask questions about springs that are really important for conserving them. Why are they where they are? What is the origin of the water in these springs? How and when are they recharged? Are they recharged every year? Are they recharged by summer rain or by winter rain? So just a whole bunch of geohydrology questions that we could answer using experts. And we looked at isotopes like tritium, which was released in the atmosphere in large amounts back in the 1950s with atomic bomb testing, but occurs in very low amounts naturally in the environment. And it is one way to kind of date the water in springs and tell us how long it's taken for that water to get into the spring from rainfall. So we collected a lot of water samples and did other kind of water chemistry analysis to understand more about the origin of springs. Next. And then finally, just we started taking a deeper dive into history. The park archives have all these old photographs, and looking through the old photographs, we could see all these structures around our springs, ranging from wells to, corrals to dams to things that in most cases we no longer see today. So how has this, management of the springs and these construction of structures influenced what the springs are like today? Next slide. And so this is the point where I was going to turn it over to Dan. So thank you all for hanging in there. if you could bring up the other PowerPoint, Emily, I will conclude the talk with some of the things that Dan hasn't talked about yet.
Yes.
Everybody still able to hear me okay? And see me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay, so I'm just gonna, so Dan talked a lot about the springs that we've discovered or rediscovered, or, you know, I'm sure people knew about these springs in the past, they just weren't put on maps. I'm gonna talk about some of the results of the other work that we've been doing. And this is a very preliminary brush, but go ahead to the next slide. I mentioned that these surveys that we took where we systematically searched for springs. We haven't completed this research in part because the last few summers have been kind of strange in terms of rainfall. We've gotten summer rains that started early or that came at strange times. So we haven't completed this research. But go ahead and show the next slide, and I'll explain these colored dots a little bit better. Basically, these are the yellow dots are places. All of the dots were places that we discovered early in the spring. The ones that are orange had water in April, but not in May. The ones that are kind of purplish had water in May, but not in June. The ones that are greenish had water in June, but not in July. And the ones that are blue are the ones that had water just prior, like a day or two prior to the summer rain starting in 2017. So of all these dots on the map, it's just the blue dots that had water during the driest time of the year. So that's really what we're trying to get at, is what are the most reliable springs? Obviously we can look at plants and other information to do that, but knowing where there's water is just really helpful for us. So as I said, this is continuing. Next slide. There's a lot of things I can say about geohydrology. I can get really technical about this, and I'm not going to. But if you kind of look at the image on the left, it's a LiDAR image of the park, and right in the center, just slightly to the right of center, is a big circle, and that big circle is actually a very old landslide, maybe 1 million years old. What we found is a lot of the springs are associated with large landslides, either where there's a bedrock ridge that runs through the landslide or along the edges of it. So the right-hand image is just a clip from the image that Dan showed earlier with some of the springs, and we find a strong association. So the water is moving down through the alluvium and the landslide and then surfacing where it hits bedrock. Next slide. For low elevation springs, in particular, where we've done a lot of water chemistry work, it's hard to see this image, but basically the blue dot in the center is a spring-fed tinaja, and you know we kind of think about there being 5 sources to these Rio-Creen springs or these tinajas. One is they can fill directly with precipitation. 2, they can fill when you get stream flow coming down the mountain, but that water will dry out during the dry periods. They're spring-fed from local water that's stored in sediment nearby, sometimes moving down the drainage. They're also spring-fed sometimes by local bedrock fractures that lead directly into the tinaja. And some of these rock pools or tinajas are fed by really deep fractures that are coming off the mountain. And so some of the water that you find in these rock pools in streams at low elevations is very, very old water. We know that it fell as rain before the atomic bomb testing started in the 50s. It could be thousands of years old. So you get these different kinds of water that can be present in these systems at different times of year. The base flow is always there, but it's overwhelmed by the stream flow at certain times of the year. And the only way you can really test it is you scoop the water out of the tinaja, and then you let it fill from the spring water, and then you collect the spring water and test that. Next slide. Kind of in contrast, the high elevation springs are primarily young water. They're primarily recharged by snow. This is just, the graph just shows a data logger that we put in the spring box at Spud Rock Spring. And it shows that the spring goes dry in the late summer and through the fall, and then it's recharged starting in January or December. And that's a consistent pattern. supported by the isotope work of what we see in most of these high elevation springs. So the snowfall and the rain is really essential to recharging our high elevation springs in the Rincon and Catalinas. Next slide. And I just want to touch, I could talk a lot about the history, but I just want to mention one spring here. Some of you may have been there. It's called the Spud Rock Spring, and it's a spring that's not very good, but Spud Rock cabin, the Spud Rock area was occupied starting in the late 1800s. There were cabins there, there was a farm there, and so the area is known for its spring. Next slide. And we could not figure out why that spring was dry all the time until we found this historic photograph. And it's a photograph from the 1950s. And in the background, you see a water tank. We actually found the foundation for that tank buried. The current site of the spring is not anywhere near the spring box, which is about maybe 25 feet upslope. It's actually right next to that old water tank foundation. And that seemed just so curious to us. We were just scratching our heads as to what was going on. So we went out to do kind of more of a deep site inspection. Next slide. And what we found was that the spring that everybody called Spud Rock Spring was not the spring at all. What it was at the end of the old water line that was still flowing from the old spring box, which was buried in the meadow. And what they did when they took the water tank out is they just cut the old pipe. And so this Spud Rock Spring was really just a hole in the ground that was filling from water, draining from the old spring box down into the pipe and into the mud. So we went back up slope about 25 feet. We started digging around. Next slide. And we found the spring box. It was buried under about a foot of, the surface of it was buried under about a foot of soil. It had been filled with a bunch of old junk, metal and rocks and concrete. And so when the Wilderness Act came in and we removed all of the human influences from the wilderness, they cut the tank into pieces and they buried it. They filled the spring box with pieces of the tank and other things, and then they buried that. But they didn't take out the pipe. And so we had this very strange water system that wasn't really working anymore because we no longer maintained the spring box. Next slide. So what we've done for the short term is we've put a cover on it and buried it again. In the long term, we'll probably remove the spring box and let the original Spud Rock Spring come back to the way it was prior to at least park management of it. Who knows what else is under the ground there? We assume that this area was used prehistorically. Historically, it's a very wet area. There's an aspen grove there. There's this meadow. Well, one of the cool things from a camper point of view, because we have a campground at Spud Rock, is that we found a number of springs. Go ahead and show the next slide. In our surveys, we found a number of springs in the vicinity of Spud Rock Campground that are natural. And so these are potential water sources, alternative water sources that we can direct campers to, so that when they camp in Spud Rock Campground, they have other options as far as water if there's no water available in the campground. Next slide. This is part of kind of, again, the bigger project of where we're going with this spring investigation from a visitor point of view. We've had so many cases in the past where hikers in the Rincons became dehydrated because they didn't know, they couldn't find water. They went to a campground and the spring was dry and they just didn't know where else to look for water. So as we discover springs, if we have springs that we feel are less ecologically sensitive, we want to make that water available to, and that knowledge of that water available to people that are hiking and camping in the area. So Olivia Thorpe and others have been developing a guide to other springs that aren't on maps, and we hope to be making this available to visitors at the visitor center, through our website, and through different kinds of apps so that they can find water. And just from a safety point of view, we think this will really improve things and help us continue to have camping and hiking up there, even with the drying up of some of the historical springs. And as I mentioned in the case of the Spud Rock example, that loss of water may really have to do as much of the way we've managed springs as it does with climate issues. Next slide. So that's the kind of the end of it for me. I apologize for the technical issues. I really appreciate you guys hanging in there. I do want to thank, in particular, Jan Bowers for her amazing work in the Rincons, Louise and Larry Stevens, and many others who have inspired this work, and also to the Friends of Saguaro National Park and Colleen Philippone and Krista Muddle and others who have supported that. And this has been a pretty low-funded effort with a lot of great interns who are just scrambling all over the Rincons. And so it's very hard work. It's a pretty rough range to get around in, and I'm really appreciative of everybody for doing that. So we do have a few minutes left despite the technical problems, so we can open it up, I guess, to questions.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Don and Dan, for sharing all of this with us. It's so inspiring to see the photos of water and the green vegetation in the mountains. So thank you. We're getting a lot of comments about how amazing it is. We have had a couple questions come in, and one of the questions was, at New Springs, do you see historic and prehistoric evidence of human activity?
Do you want that one, Dan?
You can go ahead, Don.
Okay. Yes, we definitely do. So strangely enough, some of these springs that were never mapped have very prominent evidence nearby that they were used both historically and or prehistorically by people. So yes, great question. And yeah, it's been kind of cool.
Another question about just the safety of drinking water, spring water. Maybe you just reiterate your thoughts on drinking from springs if they are encountered in the wilderness.
Yeah, this is a pretty clean wilderness. We don't have cattle grazing. We don't have development upstream. That said, I would never drink, generally water in the backcountry in any wilderness without filtering it first. So highly recommend that people filter the water. Yeah.
Great.
Because there could be all kinds of things. And you don't know what hiker the day before, how they use the spring. And as I mentioned, bears wallow in these springs and there's all kinds of potential pathogens. So definitely filter.
Okay, good to know. Another question about whether earthquakes have potentially happened in the area that would have changed the locations of springs.
Well, that's a wonderful question. The answer is absolutely, but not yesterday. Probably. I mean, there are earthquakes that occasionally occur in southern Arizona that could affect the springs, but not recently. Not for at least, I think, 100 years or so. But definitely past earthquakes going back well into time during the mountain building process definitely had a lot to do, we think, with where the springs are located. Less so recently.
Okay. We've got questions coming in fast now, so we'll try to get through as many as we can. Is the spring map available for backpackers that are planning trips, and where could they find that if it's available?
Yeah, sorry for taking all the questions, Dan, but I'll take this one too. Okay. Not yet, but it should be soon. We're finalizing it.
Okay, sounds good. And are the 230 new springs mentioned, are those all from recent surveys?
Did you say 232 springs, Dan?
No, I'm not sure where that number came from. Maybe all of our water points initially. I'd say it's far less than that. But yeah, these new spring findings are from recent surveys. And of course, there's gray area of like, what is a spring, what's not. Some places clearly have spring vegetation and damp soil, but might not have standing surface water year round. So there's more and more monitoring to do, but I'd say we found, at least 10 really good springs that we didn't know about before.
And we do have over 230 tinahas that we've mapped during leopard frog surveys in the last 20 years or so. And many of those are spring fed, but not all of them.
Excellent. Okay, well, I know there's a lot of interest about the maps and how these might be integrated into apps. So we'll stay tuned for that. And when we find out, Sky Island Alliance will definitely help spread the word that we get from Saguaro National Park. So we're at 10:30, and I just want to thank our speakers so much, not only for sharing these beautiful photos and fascinating research that you're doing, but thank you for taking care of our Rincon Mountains. Thank you for taking care of this amazing public land. We're so appreciative. We can't wait to continue to work with you on springs. Please, if you are interested in rewatching the presentation, it'll be up on our website later today. You can go to our library and look at coffee breaks. I'd also like to invite you, if you're interested, to visit our new Sky Island Alliance gear shop, where you can be sporting new apparel with coatis on them or bobcats, and the proceeds from these new gear items help support our wildlife monitoring work and training undergraduate students to be wildlife biologists in Sonora, Mexico. So thank you for supporting us by buying a new hat or shirt. And we look forward to engaging you in Spring Seeker. So if you're interested in learning more about what to do if you encounter water like springs anywhere in the Sky Island region, please visit our website and look for our Spring Seeker project. And we'd love to have you help collect some simple data. Sometimes it's just, do you find water? And then you can send us a photograph through a free app on your mobile phone. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.